Hello and welcome to the introduction for this course. What are the course requirements? You need a computer and internet connection to follow along with this course. Who is this course for? This course is for anyone who wants to learn something new. What is the course format? The format of the course is video. Hello and welcome to this video. What is SQL Server? SQL Server is a relational database management system developed by Microsoft. As a database server, it is a software product with the primary function of storing and retrieving data as requested by other software applications which may either run on the same computer or on another computer across a network or the internet. SQL Server exclusively used to only run on a Windows-based environment, but for the past few years, Microsoft has made it also available to run on a Linux-based environment. The current version of SQL Server as of the time I'm recording this video is SQL Server 2019. In most production environments, SQL Server will be installed normally on a dedicated machine, and then users would log into that machine remotely from their own computer to access the databases that they want to use. You can also install SQL Server locally on your own computer. SQL Server can be used for different purposes apart from as a database server. Every server installation of SQL is referred to as an instance. So a single instance is a single installation of SQL Server, which can hold many individual databases. In order to interact and communicate with the data stored in Relational Database Management System, there is a special language called Structural Query Language, which is used to interact with most relational database management system. Microsoft SQL Server has its own implementation of the SQL language, which is called Transact SQL, which is also referred to as T-SQL for short. In this video, I gave you a brief introduction to what SQL Server is. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. There are 5 editions of SQL Server. The 5 editions of SQL Server are Enterprise, Standard, Web, Developer, and Express. I'll start with the Express. The Express is basically the premium edition. This is mainly used in an enterprise environment. It is comprehensive. It has a high-end data center. It also has capabilities for having very fast performance, unlimited virtualization, also end-to-end business intelligence. It enables high service levels for mission-critical workloads and end-user access to data insights. This is the most complete edition of all of them. To use the Enterprise edition, you must purchase a license copy. The next edition is the Standard edition. This edition is also licensed. That means you need to purchase a license before you can use this edition. And you can use this for basic data management and business intelligence, which is suitable for small to medium-sized firms. So it enables data management with some slightly minimal IT resources. The next edition is the web edition. This edition is a licensed low-cost edition, which is very useful for web hosters to host their web applications. It is scalable, it is affordable, it's manageable, and can be used for small to large scale web applications. The next edition is the Developer Edition. This edition is completely free to use. It has the same features as the Enterprise Edition. The only difference is that it is licensed as a Developer Edition. That means you can use it freely, but you cannot use it in a production environment. The Developer Edition is very useful if you want to see what the Enterprise Edition looks like, and then you can play around with the developer one. You can also use it to build and test applications. The only difference is you cannot use it in a live production environment, but it's a good choice to experiment for educational purposes and to build and test medium to large scale applications. The final edition is the Express Edition. This edition is completely free to use. It is an entry-level free database, and it is ideal for learning and for building desktop and small server data-driven applications. It is the best choice for independent software vendors, for developers, for hobbyists, if you're building small client applications. However, it is upgradable, so you can have it and also upgrade it to have more advanced database features. The Express Edition is the most basic of all the SQL Server editions. It is completely free to use in a production environment. So if you have a small application, or if you're a small company that can't afford the standard or the Enterprise Edition, then you can use the Express Edition in a production environment. And then if you decide that you want more advanced features, you can then upgrade it to a standard or an Enterprise Edition. In this video, I introduced you to the various editions of SQL Server. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. This is the official website for SQL Server 2019 download. So there are some options here to try SQL Server on premises or in the cloud. So if you want to try it on premises, this is the trial version. If you want to try it in the cloud, then you have the option to go to Azure. But what we want the Developer Edition, which is free. There's also an option to download the Express if you wish to do so. Also, if you want to install SQL Server 2019 on Windows, Linux, or Docker containers, it tells you the way to do that here. But we are going for the Developer Edition, so I'm going to click on this button link to download the setup file for the Developer Edition. So I'll click on that, and that should start downloading. You can see here it started downloading the files for the developer setup. This should not take too long, so I'll just give it a few minutes to complete. The download has completed. This is just a partial download. I'm just going to click on this to go to the download location. So I'll click show in folder, and this takes me to my folder where it was downloaded to. So this is what the file looks like. It says SQL 2019-SSE1-dev. You can see the size is not that much. This is just a partial installation. You still have to run this file to download the full installation files. when you download the installation files, it will prompt you for a default location. So I'm going to create a folder here where it's going to download the other components of the SQL Server installation. So I'm going to right click here in my downloads folder, go new, and I'm just going to click on folder. I'm just going to give it a name. I'm going to call it SQL Server Download. So I've created this folder here inside my download file called SQL Server 2019 Download. So now that I have that folder created, I want to run this file that I initially downloaded. So I'll double click to run, and that will start up the setup files for the installation. So you can see here it gives you three options. You have the basic, the custom, and download media. Download media basically enables you to download the files so that you can later just run it from your computer or any computer you want to run the installation from. I'm going to go for the download media so that I have the option to install it later. It tells me to select the language. I'm going to accept the default package. So you have two options of packages you would like to download, either the ISO or the CAB. So I'm going to leave the default, which is the ISO. I'm going to browse to my downloads folder and just select the folder I created to download it into. So I browse to my downloads folder, and this is the folder called SQL Server. I'm just going to click OK. And you can see here on the select download location, it's now selected the folder I created. So it's going to download it into that. So once that's selected, I'm just going to click download for the download to begin. The download of SQL Server 2019 Developer Edition is now complete. So I'm just going to close this box here. It says, are you sure you want to exit? I'll say yes. I'm going to open up the folder that I downloaded the SQL Server 2019 into. So I'll double click to open it. You can see here it is a disk image file. So I'm just going to double click to open the content. So these are the content. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to install SQL Server 2019 Developer Edition. I'm going to open up the folder that I downloaded the SQL Server 2019 into. So I'll double click to open it. You can see here it is a disk image file. So I'm just going to double click to open the content. So these are the content. So to begin the installation, I'm just going to double click on this setup file here to run it, and that should start the installation. This is the initial screen you get when you try to install SQL Server, and on the left here it gives you the different steps that the installation is going to take. So the first step is basically the planning, where you just check to make sure that you've got the right hardware and software. If you want to do that, you can just click on this link here to take you to the hardware and software requirements. And there are different documentation as well, security documentation. If you want to read through it, you can. Now there is an important tool here, which is called System Configuration Checker. If you run this tool, it will check to make sure that your system is ready to install SQL Server 2019. So I'm going to click to run this checker, and that will quickly run through my system and tell me if my system is ready or not. You can see here it says the operation is completed. I have passed 8. So it ran 8 checks and I've passed it. If you want to see the details, just click show details, and it will tell you everything it has checked, and you can see here the status is passed. I'm just going to click OK to close this. So now I know my system is ready for the installation because I have passed all the hardware and software requirements. Next, I'm going to move on to the installation stage. So I'll click on installation, Inside the installation page, we have the option here to install new SQL Server, standalone installation, or add features to an existing installation. So if you already have SQL Server installed and you want to add features to the existing installation, you can still use this link. But I am installing a single instance of SQL Server, so I'm going to click on that, and that will launch the installation wizard. So this is the installation wizard. The first thing it'll ask is for a product key. It has detected that I'm running a developer edition, so I don't need a product key. If you were not running developer, you'll normally have to put in your product key there. So I'm going to accept and click next, and that will give me the next screen here. So I'm just going to check this box to accept the license agreement. You can see these are the various steps. I'm on step number 2, license terms, that I'm going to go through to complete the installation. So I'll click on next, and it will do some basic checks. It will install some set of files. So I'll just wait for it to finish. On this step of the installation here, I've had some checks here. It says I've passed 3 and failed 0. You can see here the one that I have a warning on. So it's just a warning about the firewall. This is not serious. It's not a showstopper. It will not stop the installation from progressing. If you want to see what it says, you can click on the warning thing here, and it just tells you what that says. So I'm going to click next to progress to the next stage of the installation. The next step is you are provided with this feature selection, so that you select the component you want to install for this instance. In this case, I only want to install the database engine services, so I'm going to check that. That is the only thing I'm going to check. If you look on the right here, it gives you the feature description, tells you what it is, what it does. You can also come back to add features once you've installed SQL Server, and then you have the instance. It tells you this is where it's going to install it, in the root of C program files, Microsoft SQL Server, and it tells you this is a shared feature directory. If you, for example, want to install all the features, you can click on this button and that will select all the features. But before you do that, make sure you do have sufficient disk space. So with the database engine services checked, I'm going to click next to progress to the next step of the installation. The next step is to give your instance a name. So this is the instance configuration. The default name for the instance is called MySQL Server. I'm going to change that. I'm going to give it my own name. I'm going to call it SQL Server 2019. Make sure if you decide to change the default name of the instance, the name you give, make sure there are no spaces. The name you give your instance is also used as the instance ID. So I've given my name instance SQL Server 2019. The instance ID is also going to change to reflect that. All right, you can see it has changed. So I'm going to click next to progress to the next step, which is server configuration. So it's doing the instance configuration now. And once that is done, we've moved on now to the server configuration. So I'm just going to accept all the default that is there and click on next to move to the next step. So I'm going to click next to progress to the next stage. We are now on the database engine configuration page, where you have to set the method of authentication to the SQL Server. The default is Windows authentication mode, which means whatever way you log into your computer, that will be used also to connect to the server. I'm going to select mixed mode, which is a mixture of the Windows authentication and a SQL Server mode, but you have to provide a password to accommodate the SQL Server mode. Once you have entered the password and confirmed the password, you also need to add a user that has administrative rights. So I'm going to click on this button that says add current user. I'll click on that. You can see that has added the username I used to log on to this computer, which is administrator. So once that's been entered and we've entered the password for the SQL Server System Administration account, which is called the SA account, click on next. It then gives you a summary before it actually progresses with the installation. It tells you here ready to install. You can see here I've got 2 more steps, so feel free to read through the summary. If there's anything that's not right, you can change it before you progress. So I'm happy with everything. I'm going to click on install. It also tells you here the configuration file path. So I'm going to click install, and that will begin the installation. You can see it says installation in progress. So I've gone through all the steps. I've got just one more step to complete. The installation is now complete. So you can see here status says succeeded and tells you all the features it has installed. So I'm just going to click on this close button here to exit the installation screen and also exit this screen. The next thing to do is to check for SQL Server in my programs menu. So I'm going to click on start, and on the start here there should be a folder for Microsoft SQL Server. You can see here it says new Microsoft SQL Server 2019. If I expand that, you can see here it tells me these are all the things it has installed. So these tools are quite useful. We've got the SQL Server 2019 Configuration Manager, SQL Server 2019 Error Usage, SQL Server 2019 Import Export, SQL Server 2019 Installation Center. So these are very useful tools that will come in handy if you want to perform configuration or import stuff and also add additional features to your installation of SQL Server. Hello and welcome to this video. What is SQL Server Management Studio? SQL Server Management Studio is also referred to as SSMS. SQL Server Management Studio is an integrated development environment which provides a graphical interface for connecting and working with Microsoft SQL Server. SQL Server Management Studio is a free tool provided by Microsoft to manage SQL servers. SQL Server Management Studio is used by professional developers and database administrators to manage and administer SQL servers. SQL Server Management Studio can be used to access, to configure, to manage, to administer, and develop all components of SQL Server. Let's go ahead and download and then install SQL Server Management Studio. To download SQL Server Management Studio, we're going to go to our Programs menu and look for the SQL Server 2019 folder, and inside that folder we should have a tool. So we've got Microsoft SQL Server 2019. I'm going to expand that, and we have this tool here that says SQL Server 2019 Installation Center. So if I click on that, it will launch the installation screen, and then from there we can download the SQL Server Management Studio. So this is the SQL Server Installation Center, which allows you to add components to a previously installed SQL Server instance. So I'm going to click on this installation tab here, and within the installation tab I'm going to click on the option that says Install SQL Server Management Tools. So if I click on this, it's going to take me to the download page where I can download it. So I'm going to click on that, and that will take me to the site that will enable me to download the SQL Server Management Studio. So it's trying to launch the site. So this is where it's going to take you. So I'm just going to scroll down, and you can see here there is a download link to download SQL Server Management Studio. It tells you the release number, the build number, release date. So I'm going to click to begin the download. You can see here the download has started here. So I'm just going to wait for it to complete, and then I will run the installation files. The download has completed. So this is the downloaded file. So I'm just going to click to show in folder, and that would take me to the location where it's downloaded it. This is the location where the SQL Server Management Studio setup file was downloaded to. So I'm just going to double click on it to start to install it. So I'll double click, and that should bring up the installation page. So I'll give it a few minutes to load that page. So you can see here it's loaded the page and tells me the location. This is where it's going to install it, and there is an option to change the location if you're not happy with it, but I would recommend you accept the default location and then just click on this option to install. So I'll click on the install button to progress the installation. The time it takes to install depends on your processing speed for your computer. The setup has completed for the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So I'm just going to click on the close button to exit. So if we go back into the start menu and locate the SQL Server folder, mine is called SQL Server 2019. So this is the folder. If I expand this, I should see a new component. You can see here it says Microsoft SQL Server Tools. If I expand that, we should see different tools that the SQL Server tools installed: analysis services, deployment, database engine tuning, and this is the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So if we want to interact with the SQL Server and log into it, we'll use the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So that is it for this video. We successfully downloaded and installed Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, I'll be connecting to an SQL Server instance. To begin, I'm going to start up the SQL Server Management Studio. So I'll click on my Start menu and then locate the SQL Server Management Studio, which is located in this folder called Microsoft SQL Server Tools 18. I'm going to expand that and select the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. The first time you run SQL Server Management Studio, the Connect to Server window opens up. If this window does not open up automatically, you can also launch it manually. So let me show you. I'm just going to cancel out of it. So if the window doesn't automatically show up, from within the Object Explorer, you can click on the option to connect and select Database Engine, and that will pop open the window. In the Connect to Server window, the name of your server instance should be populated. If it is not populated, you can click on the drop down, and then within the Browse option, you can click on Database Engine and you can select the name from there. For the authentication, make sure that Windows Authentication is selected and then click on the Connect button. To verify that your SQL Server connection succeeded, just expand and explore the objects inside the Object Explorer. So I'm just going to click on the plus sign and that will expand. So if I want to see the databases I have, I click on the plus next to the databases. So the fact that I can see all these objects indicates that my connection to the server was successful. To disconnect from the SQL Server, you just right click on the name of the server, just click disconnect, and to exit Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, you click on the file option and then click on the option to exit. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, you'll learn how to install the AdventureWorks sample database. AdventureWorks is a fictional company that Microsoft uses in its documentation for demonstrations. Link to download the sample database is displayed on the screen. This is the GitHub repository where the AdventureWorks sample databases are stored. So I'm just going to scroll down to see the one I want. So this is AdventureWorks full database backup, and there are different types. The one I want to download is this one called AdventureWorks 2016.bak. .bak basically means it's a backup file. Also notice in parentheses we've got OLTP. OLTP basically stands for Online Transaction Processing. So I'm going to click on the link for the AdventureWorks 2016.bak. I'll click on that and that should download the file. You can see the file being downloaded to my download location. Sometimes Microsoft moves things around just in case when you view this video, if this link or the files are no longer in this location, I'm going to have a copy of this backup I've just downloaded for you to download just in case it's no longer available or the link has been moved. The backup has completed, so I'm going to click on it to show in folder, and that would take me to the location of the backup download. This is the file that was downloaded and that is the size. In order to install this sample database inside my SQL server, I will have to restore it from this backup here. SQL Server looks for backup files in a specific location. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to relocate this file from the download location into the folder that SQL Server will go to look for a backup file. So I'm going to right click and click on cut to relocate this file. So let's go to the location where SQL Server looks for backup files. I'm going to open up my C drive, and under my C drive we've got the program files. I'll click on program files and look for a Microsoft SQL folder, which is this one here, and then I'll look for the instance of my SQL Server, which is this one called SQL Server 2019. I'm going to click on that. Inside that, I'll click on this folder that says MS SQL, and inside that there is a backup folder. So I'll click on backup, I'll right click and I'll paste it there. So I've now relocated the file I downloaded. I have now logged into my SQL Server. So in order to install that database file I downloaded, I need to right click on my databases folder. So right click, and there is an option to restore database. So I'm going to click on that. We wait for the window to open. So here we have to specify where we're going to restore the database from. It's going to be from a device. So I click on the device option, and this button here that's got several dots, I'm going to click on this in order to go to the location where the backup file is. Under the backup media type, make sure you have the file selected. If I click on the drop down, there are other options. We've got the URL, so make sure yours is on file, and then click on the add button. When you click on the add button, SQL Server knows where to go to for any backup file. You can see it has automatically gone to the location of the SQL Server. You can see the path here. It says SQL Server 2019, which is the name of my SQL Server instance. So I'm going to select the name of the file that I want to restore from backup. So that's the name of the file. The file name is populated here, and I just need to click on the OK button. So I click OK, and then it tells me the path. This is the full path to where the backup file is. Next, I'll press the OK button, and you can see we've got this option checked to make sure we're going to restore this database from full backup. Next, click on the OK button, and you can see the backup is being restored there. So we'll give it a few minutes to complete, and we should get a message to say that the backup has completed. You can see here the message has popped up saying database AdventureWorks 2016 restored successfully. So I'll click OK. So if we take a look at my databases folder, you can see this database here I've just restored, the AdventureWorks 2016. If I expand that, you will see all the tables that database has. You see, it got lots of tables. So that's it for this video. In this video, I showed you how to install the AdventureWorks 2016 database. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to create and configure a new database. We are going to use the SQL Server Management Studio to create and configure a new database. You can also use the SQL CMD utility to create a database. I have logged into my instance of SQL Server. SQL Server is a database management system that allows you to create and manage databases. When you install SQL Server, it also creates some system databases that the SQL Server uses. So if I expand this database folder, you will see that we have under there we have system databases. So these are databases that SQL Server uses. If I expand that, you can see we have 4 system databases. SQL Server uses these system databases to manage itself. The first system database is the master database. This basically keeps track of system settings. The next is the model database. The model database is used as a template for all databases that you are going to create. Next, we have the MSDB database. The MSDB database is used for scheduling tasks. And then we have the TempDB database. The TempDB is used as a temporary storage location that SQL Server uses when performing a large number of calculations or when moving records around in other databases. I'm just going to collapse this folder. Apart from system databases, there are also user databases. These are databases that you create and are dedicated to storing your own data. Let's create a new database. So I'm going to click on the databases folder. I'll right click and select the option for new database, and that will give me this new database window. The new database window has different options for us to move through before we can create a new databases. So they are organized in pages. We can see here we've got 3 pages: the general page, which is the page we're currently on, the options page, and then the files group page. So these are all the pages we need to go through to create a new database. Let's go ahead and give the database a name. So here I'm going to enter a name for the database. Notice that when I enter the name for the database, under the database files, there's going to be a name here that will populate, which will be the name of the database. And then it's also going to append the name I give the database to this underscore log. I have given the database a name of Blue Lime Hotel. Notice that under the database files, we've got the Blue Lime Hotel there. And then we've also, you can expand this, and it also has this name here, Blue Lime Hotel underscore log. When you create a database, it has 2 database files. The first is just the normal database file, and then the second is a database log file, which has the underscore log name appended to the name of the database. And then here we've got owner. So when you create a database, you have to specify an owner. If you don't specify an owner, it will set the owner to default. So when you give the database an owner, that owner account can be responsible for managing the database, assigning permissions to other users to access the database, and so on. So I'm going to click on this button here that has 3 dots, and that will enable me to select a database owner. I'm going to click on the Browse tab, and I'm going to select an account. I'm going to use the database administrator account, which is the account that I have used to log on to this computer. So I'm going to select that and check that and click OK, and then click OK again. And you can see now it has registered the owner as the administrator account for my computer. Let's take a look at the database files option here. So when you create a new database, it creates 2 files, and these are the logical names. So the first name is just the name of the database, and then it gives the database a name and then appends the underscore log. So this underscore log means it's a log files, and then the actual data that goes into the database will be stored in the data file, which is just the name of the database. The next tab is the file type. So if I just drag that a bit so you can see, the file type column basically displays the information that is going to be stored. So here under the file type, we have the rows data and the log data. Let's move on to the next column here, which is the file group column. The file group column basically allows us to create multiple data files for our database. In large databases, it is often more advantageous to split the data across multiple files so that they can be placed on separate hard drives. This is used to increase the speed at which they can be searched, or you can place the data files in different geographic regions so that they are physically closer to the end user. Let's say, for example, you have data that relates to East Coast. You can place those data to be stored in a data center in New York. Alternatively, if you have data that relates to West Coast, you can place those data to be stored in a San Francisco data center. Even when data is split, they are still collectively part of the same database. They are just stored in separate locations to make it faster for the users closer to those locations to communicate or retrieve data more efficiently and faster. For our purpose, we are not going to split the data. We're just going to leave it on the primary file group, which is a single data file. The next column is the initial size column. What this is basically is an initial size that is reserved for the database in the hard drive. The next column is the auto growth / maximize. When we do eventually fill up the initial space reservation, the database will automatically grow based on the settings on this auto growth column. The default is to grow by 64 megabytes. When it hits the reservation allotment, it will continue to do so until the entire hard drive is full up. I'm just going to expand this just to drag it so that you can see all the options. If we look on this button here with all these dots, if I click on it, you can see you can change the auto growth for the database. So it is set either in % or in megabytes. The default is in megabytes, so you can alter the figure just by the drop down menu here. And then you can also set the maximum file size. At the moment, the default is unlimited, but if you want to cap that and limit it, you just select on the limited and then you set a value that you want to cap it to. I'm not going to change anything here, so I'm just going to click OK to exit that. Let's move on to the next column, which is the path. This basically displays the default path for the database. And this path includes both the data file and the log file. You can see this top one is for the data file, and this one here is for the log file. One of the good practices of a database administrator is to store the data and the log file on different physical drives so that they can be read from and written to simultaneously. However, for our purpose, we want to keep things fairly simple. We are going to leave everything on the default location. In a production environment that is very busy, it's a good idea to have the log and the data file on different physical drive. This will improve any performance to the server. Also, if you decide you want to give the file path a different name, there's an option to do that. If you just click inside the file path, you can change the name, but there should not really be any need for you to do that. So I would recommend you accept the default, unless of course you're in a production environment and then there are network reasons or administrative reasons for you to do that. But for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to do that, but the option is there. I just wanted to point that out if you ever need to change the path name. Let's move on to the next page, which is the options page. So I'm going to click on the options tab, and that will display the properties for that page. Inside the option page, we have collation. Currently it is set to default. The collation basically refers to how SQL Server will respond or sort information when you ask for information from a database. So when the information is returned, it can return the information either in ascending or in descending order, Normally, the collation property is set based on the regional settings of your computer or your business. So if we click on the drop down, you can see different types of collation that can be set. The next option here is the recovery model. The recovery model defines how backups are made. The default is full, which means it will back up everything on your database. It might make sense to only back up changes that have been made since the database was last backup if you have very large databases. So there are different database strategies depending on your organization's requirements. So if we click on the drop down, you can see here we've got full backup, we've got bulk log, and we've got simple. So the strategy you use depends on your organization's requirements. Next option here is the compatibility level. The compatibility level basically is where you specify if the database that you are creating is going to be compatible with prior versions of SQL Server. So at the moment, the compatibility level is set to 2019. If you want it to be compatible to other databases, you click on that, say these are different SQL Server versions. So if you want it to be compatible to a specific version, you can just specify that inside this compatibility level option. Next, we have this containment type. Currently, it is set to none. The containment type basically means that the database will fully require a SQL Server for maintenance. Setting this to any other option, for example, if I click on the drop down, there's an option called partial. If you set that to partial, what that means, it will move some of the management tasks into the database container. For instance, you could have the database manager verifying login credentials rather than having the SQL Server engine do that task. I'm going to keep things simple and accept the default value for the containment type. Also in this area here, there are other options that you can change if you wish to do so at a later stage. But for now, I'm going to keep things simple. You can always come back to this page and make changes once you have created the database. Let's go on to the final page, which is the file group page. Now, this page is where we can set the options for setting up or selecting a file group if we are creating multiple data files. I'm not going to be doing any of that. I'm going to keep things simple. So now I've gone through all the pages to create the database. I'm going to come here on the bottom and just click on this OK button, and that will create the database. You can see here we now have a new database called Blue Lime Hotel. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to create a table inside our database. Databases created by SQL Server stores their data inside tables. What is a table? A table is a collection of related data held in a table format within a database. A table consists of columns, which are also referred to as fields, and also consists of rows, which are referred to as records. So a table is kind of like an Excel spreadsheet that has columns and rows. Each table in a database holds data about a different but related subject. So an example of a table is this illustration here. So the columns in a table are horizontal. You can see first name, last name, address, city, state. These are all referred to as columns within a table. They are also referred to as fields. And then we have the individual records within the table, which are called rows. So you can see the rows are vertical. You see Johnny, Angela, Rick, these are all rows. Cash, Randall, Peters, and so on. When you are creating a table inside the database, you have to specify the type of data that the table is going to store. So they are referred to as data type. A data type is defined as the type of data which any column or variable can store in Microsoft SQL Server. There are different data types within SQL Server. This is an illustration showing the different data types available in Microsoft SQL Server. You can do a Google search to know more about these individual data types. Another thing to note when you are creating a table is you want to specify if you want to allow null values. A null value is any piece of information that is blank or unknown. I have already logged in to SQL Server using the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So to create a table inside a database, I'm going to expand this database folder. And this is the database I want to create a table in. It's called Blue Lime Hotel. And inside that, there is a folder called Table. So I'm going to select that, right click and select New. There are different options here for creating tables. The top one is the standard relational database table, and then we've got different types. I'm going to quickly go through the different options here to create a table. The first on the list here is the standard table type. This is the one used by most relational databases. And then the next one is called memory optimized table, which will store data in system memory as well as on a disk. So they are faster to read and write too. Next, we have the temporary tables. The temporary tables maintain date and time stamps for every change made to the data that they store. This allows you to essentially look back in time and see the state of the data as it was at any time. Regular data table don't include this capability. It can only show you the current state of the data. Next, we have the graph tables. The graph tables are structured differently than tables that follows the relational model of storing data. With the graph tables, you store things called nodes and edges, which are used to define a web of interconnected relations. Next, we have the external tables, which are for connecting to Hadoop. Hadoop is a NoSQL database type, and also for blob storage locations. And you also have the file tables, which are for storing files inside the SQL Server databases. But we're going to stick to the standard relational database model for creating a table, which is the top option. I'm going to select the top option, which is the standard method for creating tables on relational database systems like SQL Server. So I'm going to click on that, and that will launch the screen, the interface that I would use to create the table. There are three options here for creating a table. You need to first of all give the table a column name, and then you specify the data type, and you specify if you want the column to accept null values or not. So I'm going to enter a column name for this table. So the first column name here I have set is called the first name. Notice that there is no gaps, no spaces between the column name. Okay. And we move on to the next page, which is the data type. We have to specify the type of data we want the column to store. So if I click on the drop down here, you see different data types that SQL Server provides for you to use. I'm going to select this data type that says nvarchar 50. Generally speaking, if you're writing an application or collecting data for multiple languages, then this nvarchar is the best option. The 50 here basically means you're going to allow a maximum of 50 characters. So if you have a first name that is longer than 50 characters, it will not accept that. The nvarchar data type is a variable length data type. So it stores character data in a variable length field. The data can be a string of single byte or multi-byte, letters, it can be digits, and other characters that are supported by the code set for your database system. nvarchar stores Unicode data. So if you have requirements to store Unicode or multilingual data, nvarchar is the best choice. Now that we've entered the data type, we move on to this option that allows null values. Now, we don't want this value to be null. We want to have some information for the first name of this column, because this is some information about hotel guest. So I want that information to be collected. I don't want it to be null. So I'm not going to allow blank values. So I'm going to move on to the next column here. I'm going to give a name to this column and then do the same thing. I have added the other columns here. So we've got the last name, address, city, state, postcode, and country. I've given them all the same data type. However, the length for the data type is different for some of them. So in the city here, you can see the length I have given this is 25. That means the data entered for the city will not exceed 25 in character length. So if the character length is more than 25, it will not accept that. Also for the state, I've given it 20, which means it will accept a maximum of 20 character length for the name provided for the state. For the postcode, the character length for the data type, I've specified 10. So if the data supplied for the postcode is more than 10 in character length, it will not accept it. The country, I've set the maximum character accepted to be 25. So if the data supplied has a character length more than 25, it will not accept it. On the allow nulls section, I've got some of the boxes here checked, which means these fields will allow null values. So if someone does not know or does not have the information for the address, we will accept blank or unknown values. Also for the state, the postcode, so we are going to allow null values, but the only two columns we are not going to allow null values are the first name and the last name. We definitely want to know what the names of the hotel guest is going to be. It is easy to change the character length. For example, if you want to change this from say 25 to 30, you just come here and just type in 30 and you change it to that. I'm going to change it back to 25. On the bottom here, we have the column properties, which shows you the different properties set for the column. At this stage, we have not given the table a name. The name option will come up when we save the information we have set for the structure of the table we've created. So now we're going to save this. On the menu here, there is an option here that says Save Table. So if you click on that, it will then pop up a name here. It gives you a default name for the table. So this is where you enter the actual name you want to call your table. I've called mine Guest. So I'm going to click OK, and that should create the table. So I'm just going to exit out of this table window here. Just click on the X. And if I come to my database, under my database here, you can see you've got tables. If I expand that, you should see the name of my table. So that's the name of my table I just created. It's called dbo.guest. This dbo this prefix here basically means database owner. That means the owner of this table is the database owner. So whatever account was used to create this table, or the database owns this table. A DB or a database owner is a user account that has implied permissions to perform all activities within the database, which also includes the tables. For any reason you need to make changes to the table structure, you come here and click on the table name, you right click, and then there's an option for design. You click on design, and that will show you the design view where you can make modifications to the table structure. So I'm just going to X out of that. So that is it for this video. In this video, I showed you how to create a table. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, I'm going to show you how to enter data into a table using the SQL Server Management Studio. I have logged into SQL Server using the SQL Server Management Studio. So I need to locate my table, which is inside this database called Blue Lime Hotel. So I'm going to expand the database, and this is the tables folder. Within the tables folder, I've got my table here, which is called Guest. So I'm going to right click on it and then select Edit Top 200 Rows, and that should display a table grid. And you can see the grid here on the right. At the moment, all the values are set to null because the cells are empty. I'm going to start adding some data into each of these columns. The moment I start adding data, it will automatically add another row underneath. At the moment, we've only got one row. So if I come here where it's got the first name, you can see here, the moment I tabbed, it's automatically created a second row underneath. I have added some data into each of the columns here. And notice here, we've got a little icon here, which indicates that the cell is being modified. You can see it on the bottom here, it tells you. And then we've got the red question marks, which indicates that this particular cell has changed. All right, so this is basically just to give us a warning that we've made some changes to the original structure of the cell, but we have not saved it. So to save the data that I have entered, all I need to do is press enter on my keyboard, and that automatically saves the data. You can see all the red marks has gone, which means the data has been saved. If I want to enter more rows of data, all I need to do is come here, just click inside the cell, and then it will allow me to add some more data into the cells for each column. On the second row here, I am modifying this cell. I've added Angela as the first name here, and for the last name, I purposely have not entered anything. So I'm going to press enter to save that data. So when I press enter, notice I get this message pop up. The reason this message has popped up is when the table structure was designed, I did specify that the first name column and the last name column will not accept null value. A null value is an unknown value or empty information. So this message here is responding to that. So it's forcing me to enter a value for the last name. I have now added a value for the last name. Now I should be able to save the information. So if I press enter, you can see that the information has been saved. But notice here, I've got null values for the address, for the city, for the state, the postcode, and country. That is because when the table was designed, I did have the option to accept or allow null values for these columns. There are times where you need to collect data and you may not have the required information. Depending on how the table structure was designed, you may be able to accept null values and then populate those columns later when you have information for that particular data. I'm going to exit out of this grid here just by clicking on the X, and that will take me out. If I want to view the records I've just entered, I can right click on the name of the table and select top 1000 rows. If I click on that, it should show me the records that that table contains. You can see here, these are the records. At the moment, I've only got 2 rows. If you see on the bottom here, it tells me that I have 2 rows inside the table, which are these 2. Here above here, this is the SQL or SQL statement that SQL Server Management Studio created to send to the database server in order to generate the response that you can see here below. In this video, I showed you how to enter data into a database table using SQL Server Management Studio. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, you will learn how to create a table from a flat file. What is a flat file? A flat file refers to data that contains records with no structured relationships. Flat files may also contain basic formatting. A typical example of a flat file is a CSV file. I've got a CSV file on my desktop. This is the file that I'm going to create a table from. So let's take a look at the content. So I have 5 columns. We've got employee ID, the name, the title, we've got the country, and then we've got the email address. So I'm going to create a brand new table inside our database using the information from this CSV file. I have logged into my SQL Server using the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So to begin the process of creating a table from a flat file, I need to go to my database, which is called Blue Line. I need to right click and click on the task option. And within the tasks menu, there's an option here to import flat files. So I'm going to click on that. This interface basically describes what is about to happen. There are different steps here on the left that has to be followed in order to create the table from the flat file data source. It tells you here that this wizard will help you import the contents of a file into a new table in your database. So to import data, it tells you things you must do. You must specify the input file containing the data, and then preview the automatically generated table schema, and optionally modify the columns. So let's go ahead and do this. Click on the next button, and that will prompt for a location of the flat file. So I'm going to browse to the location, which is on my desktop. So that is the file. I've got it selected, and you can see here it says data files, and it specifies it's a CSV. So I'm going to click open, and that brings in the path into the input wizard. So I've now specified the input file. Next, we have the new table name. The table name is automatically generated using the name of the flat file that you imported, but you can modify it. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to remove the first part and just call the table employees. And then under the table schema, DBO basically means database owner. So this is the owner or the account that's going to control the database and the database table. If I click on the drop down, you can see I only have one option. If I had several accounts or schemas, I could select, but for now I have to use the default schema I have available. Schema is like an account that you can use to control a database. So I'm going to click on the next button to progress to the next stage, which is the preview data stage. So this operation basically analyzes the input file structure in order to generate the preview that we can see. So it will generate up to the first 50 rows within that file. So you can see this is the preview. I'm happy with the preview. I'm just going to click next to go on to the next stage. The wizard analyzes the data and then makes its best recommendation for the data types for each of the column. As you can see here, it suggested this data type for the various columns that is going to be used by the table. You can also make changes in this area if you want to make any changes, but I'm going to leave the default setting. I'm happy with the recommendations. On this side, you can also put a check mark if you want any of the columns to allow null values. You can check that. Here we have the primary key. The primary key in a relational database management system is used to identify each record within a column uniquely. So that makes every record inside that column unique. So it gives each record a unique identifier. A typical example of a primary key could be your driver's license. So you can specify any column to be the primary key. So I'm going to specify the employee ID to be the primary key. What that means is that every record, every employee ID is going to be unique. So no two employee will have the same ID. I don't need to make any further modification to the columns. So I'm going to click next, and that will show me the summary screen of what's about to take place. It tells me, gives me the name of the server. This is the server instance, and that's the computer the server is running on. It tells me the name of the database, which is Blue Lime Hotel. It tells me the name of the table, which is employees. And this is the path to the file to be imported. And that's the name of the flat file that contains the data we want to import to create this table. So I'm just going to click on the finish button, and you can see here it has inserted the data. It says success. If you want to see the content of this success message, you can click success, and that will show you what it says. I'm just going to click OK. So I'm going to close the wizard. I'm just going to click close. And then if we go into our database here, I'm going to expand it and we'll look on that table. If I just right click on the table and click on the refresh button, we should see the new table that we've just created. You can see this is a new table called employees, which currently is owned by the database owner. So when I right click and go to select top 100 rows, it will show me the records from that table. So this is the table that we just created, and you can see all the records inside that table. In this video, you learned how to create a new database table from data imported from a flat file. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, you will learn how to import data from a CSV file into a database table. What is a CSV file? CSV means comma separated values. So the values inside a CSV file are separated by commas. I've got a CSV file on my desktop here. So I'm going to right click and open it with Notepad so you can see the content. You can see the content here. You can see each of the values are separated by commas. That's why it's called a comma separated values. I have logged into SQL Server via Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So I am going to import data from the CSV file I have saved on my desktop. So to do that, I'm going to select the database. Name of my database is called Blue Lime Hotel. I'm going to right click on the database and I'm going to click on the task option. And within the menu for the task, there is an import data option. So I'm going to select that, and that should give me a wizard. So this view here, this wizard is going to guide me through the steps to import the data from my CSV file. So I'm going to click on the next button, and it's asking here for the data source. So this is a default. If I click on the drop down, you'll see different data sources where you can get data from. I'm going to select the flat file source. The flat file source basically reads data from a text file. The text file can be delimited like a CSV file. It can also be fixed width or mixed format. So delimited format, which is the comma separated files, uses columns and row delimiters to define the columns and the rows. So I've now selected my data source, which is a flat file data source. The next thing I need to do is select the name of the file. So I'm going to use this browse option to browse to the location of my CSV file, which is located on my desktop. I have browsed to my desktop, and here under the option for the file name, you need to select CSV so that it shows all the CSV files. So you can see this is my CSV file. It's called bluelime_guest. So I'm going to select that and click on the open tab. Once you have brought in the CSV file, you can see the information here has been filled out. The file name, the path is specified here. The locale is specified because I'm in the United Kingdom. It says English, United Kingdom. The code page specifies the format is delimited because the values in the file are separated by comma. There are other options. If I click on the drop down, there's a fixed width, and there's also a ragged right, but we're going to leave it on the delimited, which is comma separated. Text qualifier, the value is set to none. Now this would come into play if, for instance, there are quotation marks around each of the text values in the table. I'm happy with the information on this general page. Next, I move on to the next page, which is the columns page. So I click on columns. Again, I'll just look through the information just to make sure everything is correct. Next, we just check the information. Under the row delimiter, we make sure that the row delimiter between the data row is set to carriage return and line feed. And then the column delimiter here, we make sure that the column delimiter is set to the character comma. We can see the preview of the data. I'm just going to scroll through to make sure everything looks okay. I'm happy with the preview. I'm just going to click on the next button. The next thing we're going to do is choose a destination where we're going to copy the data to. So inside the drop down here, I need to look for SQL Server. So there is an option here for SQL Server Native Client. I'm going to select that. That is where I'm going to copy it to. So it populates the name of the SQL Server in there. It tells you the method of authentication is going to be using the Windows authentication. That means I don't need to supply any extra credentials. I'm just going to click on the next button. Once the destination has been selected here, it also gives you a default option here to create a new table, and it also gives the table the name of the original CSV file. So I'm not going to create a new table. I want to append the data to my existing table. So I'm going to click here in the drop down and select the name of my existing database table, which is called guest. I'm going to select that. You can see the name of my existing table has been selected. I want to append the records from the CSV file to my existing table. So I've got the table selected. Next, I'm going to click on this tab that says Edit Mapping. So I'll click on it. This is where I'm going to make sure that the data that is in the CSV file is going to go into the correct column inside the SQL Server Database table. I have conveniently named all the columns inside my CSV file to match the columns in my database table. So the column names in the source, which is the CSV file, and the destination location, which is my database table, are the same. So as you can see here, it tells you the source name, the destination name, and everything just tells you the data type and the values that have null checked against them. It's a good idea to always verify the information you have displayed here inside the column mappings before you accidentally import all of the details into the columns. So I'm happy with that. I'm just going to click. I'll press the next button to move to the next stage. And on this page here, we have to review the data type mapping. This is because our SQL Server is going to strictly enforce the type of data that gets imported into the database table. So we need to make sure that what we are feeding into the database table is going to be compatible. In our own case, we are converting text or strings to nvarchar data type. This is fine as long as the data that we are importing is under the maximum character limit that we have set inside the data types for each of the columns in the table. We have two options here at the bottom here, on error global, on truncate global. What this basically means is that if during the import of the data, during the processing, if it encounters any errors or truncations, truncation basically means when part of the data is left out or shortened. So these two options here, we're saying that if any of such incidents should occur, we want the entire process to fail. You can see the option here is set to fail. There are other options which says ignore, and if I look on this button here, it says ignore, but I've left it on fail, which is the default. So if any of the processes does not complete, we want the whole processes to fail so that no modification is made to the database table. I'm happy with these two options for the process to fail if there's any errors or if there's any truncation. I'm going to click on the next button to progress. So we have the option here to save and run the package at a later time, or the default option is to run the package immediately. So I'm going to leave the option check to run it immediately and click on the next button to run the package. You can see there is a click finish to perform the following actions. So these are just the actions. The destination location is the database server, that is the instance name, and the destination provider, it tells you there, and it tells you what it's going to do. So I'm going to click on the finish to begin the process. So you can see here it says 5 rows have been transferred. There are success status for everything. That means nothing failed, everything went through. I'm happy with the success, so I'm going to close the import export wizard. I'll click on close and that will exit that. So to see the information that was imported, I'm going to expand my database, and within the database we've got the tables. So I'm going to right click on the name of my table and click on select top 100 rows, and that you can see here now it has returned 7 rows. Previously the database table had just 2 rows, but I have imported 5 more rows from the CSV file. In this video you learned how to import data from a CSV file into an SQL Server database table. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. What is SQL? SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It is also referred to as SQL by tech professionals. SQL is the standard language that is used to communicate, access, manipulate, and interact with various types of databases. SQL became a standard of the American National Standards Institute in 1986. It also became a standard of the International Organization for Standardization in 1987. SQL has different versions that is implemented by various relational database management systems. For example, Microsoft SQL Server's version is called Transact SQL, or T-SQL for short. SQL versions must be compliant with the ANSI standard in that they all have to support at least the major commands in SQL, such as select, update, delete, insert, where, in similar manner. So regardless of the version, they must all support the commands select, update, delete, insert, and where in a similar manner. Most relational database management systems have their own proprietary extensions in addition to the SQL standard. There are different things you can do with SQL. Let's take a look at some of the things that you can do with SQL. You can execute queries against a database. A query basically is a request for data or information from a database. You can retrieve data from a database. You can insert record in a database. You can update records in a database. You can delete records from a database. You can create new databases. You can create new tables in a database. You can create stored procedures in a database. A stored procedure is a prepared SQL code that you can save so the code can be reused over and over again. You can create views in a database. A view is a virtual table that is based on the result set of an SQL statement. You can also set permissions on tables, on procedures, and views. In this video, I gave you a quick introduction to what SQL is. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. What is T-SQL? T-SQL stands for Transact SQL or Transact-SQL. This is Microsoft SQL Server's implementation of the standard SQL language. Most developers and programmers refer to T-SQL as T-SQL. T-SQL has its own proprietary extensions in addition to the standard SQL language. T-SQL can be used to perform various types of actions on a Microsoft SQL Server database. It can be used to create new databases, tables, and other objects. T-SQL can be used to add user accounts, to modify, and also to manage access permissions. T-SQL can be used to run various types of maintenance tasks on an SQL server, can be used to query database. This will include retrieving data from a database, inserting records into a database, updating records in a database, deleting records from a database. T-SQL can also be used to create stored procedures in a database. In this video, I gave you a quick introduction to T-SQL. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to create a new database using T-SQL. To create a new database using T-SQL, we need to open up the query editor. So in the menu bar, click on New Query, and that will open up this query editor. I want to have line numbers inside my query editor. So to enable that, I go to the menus option, I click on Tools, and then go to Options, and within the options, select the option for Text Editor. Under the text editor, select all languages, and within all languages we have an option here that says line numbers. So just click to check that box and click OK, and then you can see I now have line number, so you can see the very first line is line number 1. To create a database, we are going to use the create database statement. On line number 1 here, I've added the statement that will create a new database. So the statement is create space database. You do a space and then you specify the name of your database. The database must be unique, so you cannot have two databases with the same name. Also, the database name has to have a maximum of 128 characters. When creating a new database, the only required parameter is the name of the database. So I've specified the name here, and then you have the semicolon, which indicates to SQL Server that that is the end of the statement. Once you've given your database a name, you need to execute the query so that the name gets displayed inside the databases folder. So there is an option here on the menu to execute the query. If you want to do it via your keyboard, you can just press F5 on your keyboard and that will do the same thing. So I'm going to click on this execute button and that will execute the query. You can see here it says command completed successfully. To see the database listed, you need to go to your databases folder, just right click, and there is an option to refresh. And then if you expand the databases folder, you can see here this is the name of the new database we have just created. In this video, you learned how to create a new database using T-SQL. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to create a new database using T-SQL. To create a new database using T-SQL, we need to open up the query editor. So in the menu bar, click on New Query, and that will open up this query editor. I want to have line numbers inside my query editor. So to enable that, I go to the menus option, I click on Tools, and then go to Options, and within the options, select the option for Text Editor. Under the text editor, select all languages, and within all languages, we have an option here that says line numbers. So just click to check that box and click OK, and then you can see I now have line number. So you can see the very first line is line number 1. To create a database, we are going to use the create database statement. On line number 1 here, I've added the statement that will create a new database. So the statement is create space database. You do a space and then you specify the name of your database. The database must be unique, so you cannot have two databases with the same name. Also, the database name has to have a maximum of 128 characters. When creating a new database, the only required parameter is the name of the database. So I've specified the name here, and then you have the semicolon, which indicates to SQL Server that that is the end of the statement. Once you've given your database a name, you need to execute the query so that the name gets displayed inside the databases folder. So there is an option here on the menu to execute the query. If you want to do it via your keyboard, you can just press F5 on your keyboard, and that will do the same thing. So I'm going to click on this execute button, and that will execute the query. You can see here it says command completed successfully. To see the database listed, you need to go to your databases folder, just right click, and there is an option to refresh. And then if you expand the databases folder, you can see here this is the name of the new database we have just created. In this video, you learned how to create a new database using T-SQL. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, I'll be showing you how to insert data into a table using T-SQL. I have opened up a new query window and I've added some SQL commands that I'm going to use to insert multiple records into the database table. So on line number 1, I'm specifying the database I want to use, and the name of my database is called YourDB. Line number 3 is the statement that you use to insert data into a table. So you type in insert space into, and then you type in the name of the table you want to insert data into. So you don't have to use the DBO prefix. This is optional. DBO basically means database owner. So you can leave that option out if you want to. It is not mandatory. As long as you have specified the name of the database you want to use, that should be sufficient. Once you have specified the name of the table you want to insert the new records into, in parentheses, you have to specify the columns for that table. Once you have specified the name of the table you want to insert the new records into, in parentheses, you specify the name of the columns for that table, and then you separate each column by a comma. So first column is product ID, comma, next column product name, comma, next column is the price, you do a comma, and the final column for that table is called product description, and then you close the parentheses. When you specify the columns, you also have to specify the values that will go into each column. So line number 5 here, we're specifying the values. So this values keyword will represent which value goes into each of the column. So you can insert multiple records into a database table like I'm doing here. I'm going to insert 3 records, or you can insert 1 record at a time, doesn't really matter. So line number 7, I specify inside parentheses, you have to enclose each of the values that will go into each column. It's very important that the right value goes into the respective column in the order the columns have been specified. When you are specifying the values that will go into each column, make sure that the values will represent the column that is going into. For example, the first column here is product ID, line number 7. So that number 1 here will go into product ID. Clamp here will go into the column called product name. And then this 12.48 will go into the price column. And this workbench clamp will go into the product description. So the values have to correspond to the way the columns have been specified in the insert into statement. Okay, so we have a comma here after line number 7. So that's the end of the first record. So record number 2 starts on line number 8. So 2 here again goes into the product ID. Screwdriver goes into product name. 7.99 goes into product price. And then this flathead goes into the product description. And then on line number 9 here, same thing. 3 goes into product ID and so on. So the key thing to remember is that when you specify your values, they must correspond to the way the product columns have been specified. For example, I cannot specify product ID as the first column and then have this clamp as the first value. It will not work. So the values have to correspond to the way the columns have been specified. When you're done, just click on the execute command to execute the query. You can see it tells you 3 rows affected. So that means it has inserted 3 rows into the database table. So if I expand my databases and go to the database called your DB, if I expand the tables here and click on this table, if I right click and select top 1000 rows, it will display the rows. You can see here I've only got 3 rows or 3 records inside the table which the query has returned. In this video you learned how to insert records into a database table. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video. In this video you will learn how to read or query data from a table using T-SQL. I have opened up a new query window and added some T-SQL commands that I'm going to use to query or read data from my database table. So I'm going to run through the commands with you. On line number 1 here, I've got a comment. This is a single line comment. So comments are just used to describe your code or your queries. It does not get executed when the script or the code is executed. Line number 3, I'm specifying what database I'm going to use. So that's the database that contains my table. So you can either specify it here as I've done on line number 3, or you can use the drop down menu here and select your database from the drop down menu. To read or query data from your database table, you use the select statement. On line number 5, I've got the keyword select, which is the key word you use to read or query data that is stored inside a database table. So after the select keyword, you specify the names of the columns that contain the data you want to read from. So here I specified all the columns that I have in the table called products. So line 5, after the select keyword, you specify the columns you want to read the data from, and each column is separated by a comma. Line number 6, you use the from keyword to specify the name of the table where the columns are located. When you're done, you just press the execute button here on the menu bar, and that will query the database. You can see it has returned all the records that are stored in that table. Another way to read or query data from all the columns stored inside your database table is to specify the statement on line number 10. So you just type in select asterisk. The asterisk means you want to read data or return data from all the columns in a particular table. So line number 10, I'm saying select star, which means all the columns from the table called products. And then if I execute that, you can see I've got the same query. To comment out a block of statements, you just do the slash asterisk and then the asterisk slash. So you can see here, all this block here have turned green because I have commented out that block. So when the code is executed, the block in green, which is comments, are excluded. When you query or read data from a database table, the result of the query, which is this down here, is referred to as a result set. You can also select specific columns from your database table to query data from. So line number 12 here, I'm using the select statement to query just 2 columns from the table, the product name and the price. And then line 13 is where we specify the name of the table we are retrieving or querying the data from. Notice line number 10 has been commented out. So when I execute the query inside the query editor, line number 10 will not execute. So to execute, I'm just going to click the execute button. You can see here it has returned only 2 columns, the product name and the price. I have added another block of code here, and this query is going to query the database and return data based on a condition. So line number 19 here, I'm using the select keyword to select 2 columns from the database table, the product name and the price. Line 20 is where we specify the table that contains the columns we have specified. Name of the table is product. Line 21, we're using the where clause. The where clause is used to limit the rows or the records that are returned from the result of the query based on the condition you have set. So I'm saying return the data based on this condition where the price is less than 11. So you can see here in the previous query, we've got 3 price range, $12.48, $7.99, $10.99. With the condition I have set, only 2 prices will meet that condition. So if I execute the query, you can see I've only got 2 records returned, which has met the condition I set on the where clause. In this video, you learned how to read or query data from a database table using the select statement. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.